every episode has been a hit.
It doesn't matter how beautiful this time is. We know that we're catching up to a sad event
You're the one that was calling him villain. I'm using your words.
until a time when you get to show it to the audience and be like, pow, what do you think about this revelation?
Flight, the Gichigumi flight, 452, add all those numbers up together, 11.
Hello and welcome to Road Goes Ever On and On. Today, Mark and I are talking about Station 11, episodes 8 and 9, the second to last two episodes of the season, so spoilers are ahead. And if you're enjoying our videos, then a thumbs up would be appreciated. And if you want to stay up to date with our videos, then just be sure to subscribe and click the bell icon so you don't miss a single one of our videos. And with that, what are kind of your overall impressions?
I love the show. The show is so good. It is like every episode has been a hit. I don't know. That's just like every episode has been so good. The writing is on point. The way that they tell this story in pieces and chunks. You're getting small pieces at a time, but throughout the story, it flushes the whole narrative out and everything feels connected. Everything feels like it has a purpose in this story. And it is so good. Like the episode 9, it got to me. Like in my second watch through, I even started feeling tears coming up because it was just so moving.
Absolutely. And it's wild to me that it's a little bit difficult to explain it. The I never thought that the show would have gone the direction that it has gone. To a certain extent, I think because of the way that the first episode ended and actually seeing that base up in space kind of made it feel like there was something much bigger and crazier going on. But at no point have I felt disappointed that we haven't gotten that. It doesn't it doesn't feel like I've always felt like something else is going to happen, and even though it doesn't happen, it doesn't feel like a rug pull because the storytelling, the characters have all been so compelling that I've loved what they've done every single time, and it's never felt like I was tricked. And I never know what to expect in these episodes, and I'm never let down when even if there isn't necessarily a big surprise. Like some of these episodes where we go back and we see moments that we knew were coming but we didn't know all the details. Like obviously there aren't necessarily huge surprises within those, but they never feel like they're just filler, or it never feels like we're not getting something amazing. It's the I don't the storytelling is great.
And yet, like, we do get surprises. Like, we had a bit of a theory of what happened to Jeevan,
Mm,
and watching episode 9, we found out what exactly happened to Jeevan, and to me, that felt like a rug pull. Like, I thought he was dead, captured, whatever, and it turns out they, like, just used him to help birth some babies. Like, that was a huge surprise. Like, but before that, he got attacked by a wolf. But
right.
which is also crazy because they set up that wolf attack from like the second or third episode. So like just
Right.
everything feels like it's in the right place. Everything feels
It
earned. Everything feels
100% everything feels in the right place. It
yeah.
feels like you can't tell this story in any other order, which is wild because flashbacks are so often just a cheap trick. Like they're a way to withhold information, and to not all the time, but most of the time. It's like a way to withhold information until a time when you get to show it to the audience and be like, pow, what do you think about this revelation? And it doesn't feel like they're doing that. It feels like because of the way that things are connected, that the only way that you can understand it is in this order. Like if you watched it in another order, you just wouldn't understand how the things connected.
Right. And just the brilliant use of like Station 11 connecting to this story, which is also semi connected to Hamlet. Like, just
Mm-hmm.
these three works of art that you could argue, you know, one is old playwrights, we have graphic novel, we have a visual television show that we're watching
Oh yeah.
that are all connected and all just tell these beautiful stories, and the characters are fleshed out. Like I feel for Tyler and seeing what he's going through and why he feels the way he does about, you know, the before times. And yeah, just everything is just so good in this show, and it's telling a human story. Like this is
Absolutely.
a truly, like, you can relate. You might not be in a post-apocalyptic scenario, but I think that this show really resonates with the human experience of life.
Definitely. You know, you mentioned Hamlet, and I think it's interesting because the more that I watch this, the more that I see connections between this and Hamlet. And yet, at the same time, while it takes so much inspiration from Hamlet, at no time does it just feel like a copy of it, or like one of those productions where it's like, well, what if we take Hamlet but we put it in the present or in the future or in a post-apocalyptic setting. You know, so it's not just a derivative work. It is taking some of the things from it, and then it's so much so building its own thing off of it, and I absolutely love that.
Yeah, and I I feel like Clark. I think this is a good time to jump into Clark and Arthur, but mostly Clark. Clark
Yes.
is rereading Hamlet as the traveling symphony comes in, and now instead of, it seems like when he was younger he maybe, you know, connected with Guildenstern or Rosencrantz or even
Hmm.
Hamlet himself, but now he kind of connects with like the king that had Hamlet's parents killed, and so he's now worried about losing his power, and he sees it from a different point of view. Like, what if everybody in the Museum of Civilization starts reading this, and then they want to overthrow me? Like, I loved that little technique of showing what Clark is going through after years of ruling this civilization.
It's wild because I think they've done such a good job of making a villain from a character that I think previously we had only thought well of. And so instead of seeing instead of seeing a fully fleshed out villain like you do see in most works, and you hope that they have a good backstory that makes them compelling and understanding, because a good villain should never see themselves as the villain. And I certainly don't think that he sees himself as a villain. I think we kind of see how he got to this point, and it's wild that they took somebody that we really liked and then changed our perception of him. And I think he was so needed in the moment in order to help establish order as society was falling apart, and inside of this airport to protect them. But unfortunately, I think his time has passed, and I think he's holding on to power. And I 100% see that connection of, what you were saying with Hamlet. He even shares the same first few letters as that character, so it really seems like a clear nod to that. And it's interesting and it's sad kind of seeing how his history shaped him, because we do get to see a little bit more flashback,
Mm-hmm.
and then how he used that to shape like the current history, and how that first helped out, and now it's like he's a relic of the past and he needs to let go. Kind of like his museum.
Kind of like his museum. I I do love that we, like you were saying, we like him in the beginning, and we hear like his side of how he viewed Arthur and his relationship, right? Where he is like, Arthur could just like command attention, and he just had this way about, like, you know, getting what he wanted, and like it was never really earned. He just had this ability with him. And Clark seems to be bitter about how Arthur was, and like, you know, even being mean to Arthur in the flashbacks, but yet when
Yeah.
Clark was at his shittiest, you know, he had a bender, he broke his sobriety, you know, kind of just being an awful presentation to Tyler at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And Arthur still defends him as his friendship. And so it's like Clark has always held on to this like resentment and like hate of Arthur because he got all the good parts and got all the, revelries that he didn't get. And
Right.
the fact that he held on to that and he just became like this bitter person, and we see in the flashbacks the perspective shifts a little bit, and then it kind of makes us hate Clark more. Clark is kind of an asshole.
I don't hate him though. I just see him as human. I see all of these characters as human, and I think that the issues we see with these characters we see as flaws. They're not it's not necessarily like an inherent evil in any of these people as much as it is flaws in their character to kind of bring them to this part. And so I still really I feel sorry for Clark, which
I do
I
too.
don't feel like I would normally feel sorry for a villain unless they're well written. And I very much feel sorry for him. And he even has a certain level of self-awareness of this, saying that he feels something like he feels like a failure, or he feels like he's hated in every room he walks into. He asks if people still like him anymore. I think that he is aware that there is this kind of dislike. He still thinks he is doing the right thing in protecting these people. He just thinks that they are resisting his protection, and he knows what's best for them. Or
Right.
maybe he's trying to, or it could even be, less altruistic, and like it does feel good to have a certain level of power, and maybe he's scared to let that go because he likes what that has given him in life. And
Yeah.
like who hasn't felt that? Like who hasn't had trouble letting go of something that once was good for them but isn't good anymore, and it's like hard to kind of let that go. So I see that in them, and I see the same kind of things in Arthur. Like as much as likable as he is, the fact that he's the one who ordered the 8 ball when he knows that Clark, has
Well,
been sober for how long. He
I don't
originally
think
forgot that.
I don't think he ordered the 8 ball. So the one guy, the hotel service, he said, because they were trying to get him out, he said, "You guys used to party. I have 8." Like he let me know that you used to parties. He said,
Oh,
"I have 8 balls." Arthur definitely did not order that, and it wasn't until they got in their fight that Clark took his first drink,
right,
and then he drank, and then he went into the full bender mode, and it looks like he may even have slept with the guy that got them the 8 balls. But it doesn't look like
right.
even Arthur partook in the drugs and alcohol. He got up, he was functioning at an early time.
But it does seem like Arthur is giving all this attention to Kiki, and it seems like he's not necessarily giving his kid some of that same attention. So it's like it very much seems like he is the center of his universe.
Mm-hmm.
And if something is far away from his orbit, if it has like an elliptical orbit, and so it sometimes like goes far out, kind of like Clark often does, where like
Mm-hmm.
Clark, because he's not in the same scenes that Arthur is, that I think Arthur forgets about Clark and forgets that, to check in on his life and see that, Clark has been sober for however long. And so it's only until like Clark comes back into his orbit that Arthur sees that, and then he is good to him, and he does, bring him to a hotel instead of going to like the bar. Or the same thing with like Kiki, where it's like Kiki's in his orbit. And I
But
think, when
but
he's doing these plays, I don't think Tyler's in his orbit.
but I don't think that Tyler is not in his orbit because Arthur doesn't want him in his orbit. I think that Tyler's not in his orbit because Elizabeth took Tyler to Germany so that she could be in some German soap operas, and so I think she took him away. And so when we see Elizabeth
But
talk,
he didn't write.
he didn't.
Remember that Elizabeth tried to like make it
Right,
seem.
right. He didn't write. You're correct. He didn't write. But
Yeah,
Elizabeth tried to lie to him and make it seem like he wrote to him, and he knew she was lying. But then when Kirsten had the conversation with him about how Arthur spoke very highly of Tyler, and he did speak about him a lot. He did talk about him a lot.
right.
Like you could even tell, like Tyler, the greatest lie detector in the world, knew that she was telling the truth in that moment, and he knew that maybe Arthur
Yeah.
did care about him more than his mom let on. So I do think that, like, Arthur, not a great guy. You know, he could probably have been a better dad.
Flawed.
Very
That's
flawed.
like that's why, like, I don't want to say like great or not great or like good or bad. Like these are very real characters to me,
Yeah.
like they they have they're not perfect. They have imperfections, and that to me is very human, and I love that about them because it doesn't feel like they are good or bad, like
Mm-hmm.
they're human.
Yeah. And I do think that they try to paint Arthur as not a great guy in the beginning. Like, they heavily imply that he cheats on Miranda with Elizabeth.
Right.
Heavily
Right.
imply that he did it, and then he was
Yes.
like, no, I never did. Like, that was, you know, and even Elizabeth implies that he cheated on her, you know, a bunch of times. And it seems like, you know, maybe he did at that point because he was accused of it or whatever. But I do think that Arthur, because of the way he was, that he could get attention from anybody, he could get all these things that he wanted, all these people in his orbit, and maybe not Miranda, but Miranda and him just couldn't line up with both of their needs. And so
Right.
I feel like they paint him as this really evil guy, and then you do see that he is not so evil. And even when Clark, like, is being like the worst person ever, he looks terrible. He's gone on a
Mm-hmm.
bender. You know, Elizabeth says, "Oh, this is your dad. They used to be friends," and he's like, "No, we're
Yeah.
still friends." Like, even then, he's still defending him, and that, I feel like, is a lot of positive character in my opinion.
Absolutely. And what's wild is that I feel like because of the way this show is produced, where we see a mix of past and present and kind of in between, we have these moments where it's both happy and sad to see characters like Arthur.
Mm-hmm.
It's so nice to see Arthur again because he is infectious. He does have such a great personality, you know, but at the same time, that you're looking at a ghost.
Right.
And so there's a certain sadness of seeing this beautiful side of him after the fact.
Yeah.
And it's not the first time the show has done that. I think we learned so much about Frank after he had already passed.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so beautiful really getting to know that character, but there's a certain like underlying sadness that's there of it doesn't matter how beautiful this time is, we know that we're catching up to a sad event where he passes,
Yeah.
and so there's this it does this melancholic thing of giving us something and having some beauty and some happiness to it, but also having this underlying sadness, and eventually probably whether or not we see a sad event or we already saw a sad event, having that knowing that the like what is going to happen,
Mm-hmm.
and it's it's beautiful and it's sad at the same time.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to add with the whole Clark thing about him, you know, becoming a villain and, you know, feeling like he's hated and whatnot, it does seem like that he is the. Oh, you're gonna say something?
Sorry, I was just going to argue the use of antagonist
Okay. With you.
versus villain. Because like, and not to be pedantic, which is exactly what I'm being, but I don't
You're
think.
also the one that said villain a lot too, so buddy, you're the one that was calling him villain. I'm using your words. Go ahead.
But like, I don't. He's not a Cruella de Vil. Like he's not a bad person.
Yeah, neither
He
is
is a
Cruella
flawed.
Deville. Didn't you see the prequel with Emma Stone? She's not a villain
No, no,
either.
I didn't.
Well,
I
she's not
didn't.
a villain anymore.
I didn't. But you know what? I thought you didn't like any of the live action stuff.
I didn't,
You
but
felt it was too derivative.
I don't like it, and I didn't like that one. That's why I brought it up for that reason.
But yeah, it's like sorry. I like he is an antagonist to our protagonists, you know? But I don't, even if I'm the person who said it, like I don't see him as an evil person.
Right. Okay, so he's not an evil person. He's the antagonist in this moment. What I was gonna add was that he feels like he's hate. We were talking about he feels like he's hated. He feels like he's when he walks in the room he's hated. It does seem like the Museum of Civilization has gotten to a point where they're tired of like it's 20 years after the pandemic. They're tired of being in there. Like they want to go out. They feel like the virus is gone. People have the traveling symphony goes around. They're not getting sick. It seems like the virus has left this world. But he is keeping the doors closed and locked because I think he doesn't want to lose that power, and he doesn't want to lose like the feeling of being worth something. Like I think that he feels, especially with everything that he goes with Arthur, that he feels pretty worthless. And it's this Museum of Civilization has finally given him some self-worth, and now if he opens the doors and it's a like you said, it's not an evil thing. Like he has self-worth, and he feels if he lets everybody out, his self-worth leaves, and like that he'll be worthless again, and that's a scary feeling to him. And so like you can really empathize with his feelings of like wanting to keep the museum closed.
And it's wild because I feel like you can see parallels in what he's doing with what some people are doing today, where he is, I mean, kind of like curator of a museum, he's also taking a larger curator role of curating the knowledge that they experience. So not just like what do you get to see in this museum, but having witnessed, actors do a scene, he sees the power of theater and he realizes this stuff actually really compels people. And it might actually compel people to act out against our society, which I don't know what his intentions are. Is he trying to protect them? Maybe he is. Maybe he thinks he is. Or is he trying to protect himself? And like make himself still, have a purpose in this world. Who knows if it's either of those, a mix of those, who knows what it is. But because of that, he is trying to curate what they have access to. And so to a certain like ban a play from being shown because he thinks that they may see that and act out. And it's wild because it's like books are being banned today, because people are worried about, well, what if somebody reads it and they have the wrong takeaway and they act out in society because of it.
And it sounds like that's what a dictatorship does. So like dictatorships, they always want to censor what you can read, what you can watch, and he is kind of being a dictator. And honestly, when you start censoring things like that, when you start saying we can't have this play for that reason, that's when people want to rebel against those things. So like he trying to hold on to his power by censoring this play could lose power in the next episode because he is trying to keep everybody's knowledge contained, essentially.
Yeah, it's
So
wild.
I think this is a good time to talk about Tyler and Kirsten.
Absolutely. I definitely think there are parallels there as well. I don't know if Tyler is potentially Hamlet, and if so, it feels like Tyler and Clark are playing very similar roles in that, there was a line in here about I was late and you were early, which also kind of feels like the dynamic between Hamlet, I think it's Claudius and Fortinbras, where it's like Claudius is a little too early and takes the throne immediately, you know, and takes it with power. I think that Hamlet keeps like waiting for the right opportunity and making sure that he's right, you know, and he unfortunately has a tragic end because of it. And then the one person who has like is there at the right moment, kind of Fortinbras, is the one that ends up taking it. And it kind of feels like that, where it's like I feel like Clark is too late. Like that time has passed. He was needed in the moment to help them bridge that gap, just to like survive. But beyond that, unfortunately, I don't think that Clark is needed.
Yeah.
I think that, and similar, I think that the Tyler was also needed as somebody to help bring forth a new era. But I think he was just born a little bit too soon, and so he was shunned by the people from the previous era, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And while he was adopted by the people in this new era, I think he is unfortunately bringing about his own demise, I think.
Yeah, he's what's his name? I can't think of his name. The one that
Lonergan.
he's Lonergan, and Lonergan
He's
dies. Lonergan's the one that
right.
dies, and just like Kirsten
He
says to him, she's like, "You're gonna die, and there's nothing I can do to help you." You know, that's it's. I feel like we are setting up his inevitable death potentially.
I and if not, they're doing a great job of subverting expectations. Like they definitely, it definitely feels like they're building up to that. We'll see where it actually goes with that. But
You
it's yeah.
you know what I was thinking as I was watching this episode when they do their little scene, like Tyler and Kirsten act out the scene in the Museum of Civilization Tower. So the first thing that came to my mind was Tyler did a pretty good job acting. And then
He did.
he did, he put on an act for Kirsten and the Traveling Symphony in the very second episode. He put on an act in Pinktree to, he would leave, come
Right.
back, and be a new person and just completely say he was somebody else. And it got me thinking of like, how did Tyler become a good actor? Both of his parents were actors. He was raised by actors, and Clark
Yeah.
was, you know, in a small amount of time in the airport, he was in a way raised by Clark. So another good actor who showed acting bravado to take over the
Right.
airport. And so it makes sense that his character could act because he has this background.
You know, I would argue that by the airport, I don't think that Clark was an actor anymore as much as he was a CEO whisperer. And what was the line that he said when he was like alpha something, when he was like yelling at the person over the phone, and it seemed like it was a real argument, and it turned out that he was like doing alpha moves or something like that. Unfortunately, I think he had moved on to that phase where he was less an actor and more a person trying to use certain power plays to obtain or hold power. And I think he did believe it was in the best interest. Like he thinks that a CEO would probably think it was in the best interest.
But I would push back on that and say that I don't think that Clark is that person and that he's acting being that person to get the CEOs where they
Hmm.
want. Just like in the airport where he acted like the leader when he isn't really a leader type figure.
Yeah, yes. I do think that he is not that person, and I do think he has to act out that role every time. I definitely agree with that. Whereas like with Arthur, I think when he's not on the screen, his magnetism is natural.
Yeah.
Versus I think that every time that Clark wants people to listen, I think he has to work hard and focus,
Yeah.
you know, all of his being on this is my role. I am doing this. I am that magnetic person what do I need to do to like take on this role. I definitely agree with that.
Okay, I have a pipeline conspiracy that,
Ooh.
well, not really conspiracy, but you kind of went down this rabbit hole a little bit. K
That's where I feel most comfortable is
in the rabbit hole.
inside of rabbit holes. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I've got like those like bunny ears so I can fit in,
Yep. Yep.
you know, and they won't look at me weird when I pop my little head out because I don't want them to run away. I want to live among the rabbits
Right.
in the
Right.
rabbit holes.
You want to be a human in rabbit clothing, or like a raccoon dog or
Yeah.
something. So
Yes.
you were talking about K being the 11th letter. Kirsten's name starts with K.
Oh, I forgot about this rabbit hole.
I know, but
Yeah, okay, okay.
you
I'm
had
there.
me think, right, and so I was doing
Yeah.
all these, sleuthing and
Yeah.
flight, the Gitchigumi flight 452. Add all those numbers up together, 11. I'm just saying
You-
that 4, 5, and 2 is 11.
That's a very real possibility. It feels like what I must have sounded like, but it actually seems plausible.
I might be, might be all connected to this 11, or just subtle details, little nods.
It was sad seeing his, Tyler's reaction to that, where who knows how long it's been since he's been there, and he sees what they've done with that history and the fact that it's been rewritten, which also kind of reminds me of some current-ish events, where history is written by the victors, and so you get to choose exactly how you portray that.
Yeah.
And it was portrayed as if it was a noble sacrifice of the people on that plane versus
They didn't have a choice.
they didn't have a choice.
They did not
And
get
and
to...
the one who did manage to escape
They
did
killed
not
him.
get the choice to try and live,
Exactly. It's...
So it was sad seeing that kind of like revelation
Yeah.
that past had been rewritten.
There is a little bit of also symbolism with the Museum of Civilization. If you think about the space station that they're on, they can't leave the space station, they can't go out, they can't go breathe the air. The Museum of Civilization is like that trapped space station. None of the people can leave there, nobody can go outside because of fear that they can't breathe the air that's out there, otherwise they'll get the sickness. I thought that was a little nice,
Oh yeah.
nice touch there.
It's it's I really like the different, like you point out, the different mediums that are used and the different kind of stories that are being woven together, because it is interesting seeing how Station 11 comic book, affects the people in this world, which then affects like the plays that they put on, and it's layers on layers, and it's really interesting.
And that's basically what Arthur said to Clark. We're making this art that's transcendent, that is something that it breaks outside its medium, and it's what he calls it makes magic. It's that magic feeling. And I think Miranda wrote Station 11, which is that transcendent feeling. And this show Station 11, and like Hamlet was this magical thing that, look, how many years ago was that written, that is still relevant. Like The Lion King is basically Hamlet. Like that's
Right.
what's
So
great.
many things.
Right.
Yes.
It's transcended what it normally was.
Right. And there's arguments towards, how derivative is the work of Hamlet. So, technically, have any of the things that inspired that, because there are references that seem pretty similar within that kind of lifetime, that did those affect Hamlet, and therefore did that impact kind of live on. And so it's also interesting seeing how your one work, how it affects the people that consume it, and also how do they interpret it, because I think that similar to Hamlet, Hamlet has had a lot of interpretations. It is Shakespeare's longest play, and I And there's a line or some lines that kind of allude to the fact that Shakespeare's plays have probably been closer to like 2.5 hours. So almost every performance of Hamlet has been edited.
Hmm.
So lines are removed in order to make it compact and fit that idea of what was a traditional Shakespeare performance. So all of these interpretations are different and people take things different ways. And I think we see the same thing with Station 11, where it is up to interpretation. I think we see that Tyler has taken it one way and is doing one thing with these people, the undersea, and Elizabeth has taken it a different way. And I think we've even seen Frank push Elizabeth to put her own interpretation on it.
Kirsten.
Where Kirsten, I'm sorry. Tyler has taken it his way. Kirsten has taken it her own way.
Hmm.
And I think that Frank has pushed Kirsten to put her own interpretation on it when she said something about it ending without it like showing something.
Hmm.
And Frank asked her what she thought about that. And she has shown her own thoughts that Tyler was unaware of. So it's interesting seeing how different people can consume the same thing and have different thoughts on it and then different actions based off of those kind of outcomes.
Yeah. And, you know, with Station 11, I feel, we usually watch the episode twice to, break down everything that we can find. I feel like I
Mm-hmm.
could rewatch this show again and still pick out things. Like, I'm still finding things. Like, in the beginning of episode 9, when the title card comes up, Kirsten's in the cabin. Did you notice anything?
I don't know if I know what you're referencing.
So when the title card Station 11 comes up in episode 9, it says
Mm-hmm.
Station 11 and Kirsten's in the cabin. The O is around her head and it looks like Dr. 11. And
Ooh.
especially in this episode when there were many moments where she had these Dr. 11 revelations. Like when Jeevan left, she sees Dr. 11 in the reflection. When Jeevan's thinking
Yeah.
about how she's going to be okay, then there's her walking across the ice looking at Dr. 11. And there were just all these like beautiful connections with Dr. 11 and Kirsten, and nothing even showed it better than title card. The O was around her head. It looked just like the helmet. And I was like, this show just keeps on giving. Just every time.
It definitely feels like this show has solid, I don't know if I'm using the right term, but like storybook, where somebody draws out what a shot will look like ahead of time,
Storyboarding.
or it's like storyboarding. Where it's like well visualized, whether it's on paper or at least in somebody's head, where they really understand how things are going to be framed, lined up. It's not just, hey, let's get you into this set and then let's kind of see how it comes together. Shots like that, shots like the pool room, seeing the distance of it, all of these other things feel so well planned, where it seems like ahead of time somebody understood how exactly things would be framed to really convey the information well on like a psychological level, where you can see something and not even necessarily be able to process it out loud, but still kind of like take it in and kind of understand that. Just really, really well kind of put together.
Yep.
Previously, when you were talking about the play that, or in the museum, when Kirsten and Tyler had to show that they were legitimately actors by putting on a scene. What I thought was interesting was I loved their use of the space because it's not done very often, because most theaters are fourth wall type setup,
Mm-hmm.
like you have your stage and then you have your audience, and there is like not a real wall, but there is, like a 2D plane separating the two. there are some theaters that are set up as like theater in the round, which is a really interesting medium because you do this interesting thing of getting people's attention in different way, and you can actually hide things or show things or and what was interesting was you had Clark in the center of, and it's a tower, so it's round. Clark in the center of the tower, and the two of them moving around that and controlling his attention using that theater in the round space. Where she grabs his attention with this moment where she like really hams it up so that he can like hide something. And to me that was kind of interesting using a not commonly used medium in order to be able to like use and control somebody's attention. It's if you ever get a chance to see like anybody, not necessarily just you, because maybe you've seen theater in the round,
No, just
but
me.
if anybody gets a chance to see something that's done in theater in the round, really interesting stuff. And to me, the people that wrote this have a love for all of these mediums. Like they have a love for film because they have made some seriously beautiful, cinema, and they have a love for theater. You can see there are so many influences of like Hamlet, theater in the round, like acting in general in this, in comics, in all of these different kind of mediums, and I love seeing this love represented. Like it really comes through as people that are passionate about these different works and happy to share it. It kind of reminded me, we recently went to Comic-Con, and it reminded me of like the passion that these people have about their different passions and how they love to share that. Like you can always see when love for something comes through versus when just like cheap cash grabs come through.
Definitely.
And this very much feels like love coming through.
Oh yeah, this whoever the people in charge of making this, they have put a lot of attention and detail, a lot of care, probably a lot of hours into making this something special. And what's crazy is that like I know that we watch Station 11, but I don't feel like a lot of people know about this show. And I think because of when it came out, right when the pandemic was coming out, nothing was really coming out at that time, like streaming or otherwise. I feel like this went very under the radar. And I feel like it is really sad that a lot of people don't know about it.
But it was a time when people were begging for content. I mean, like this was Tiger King was huge because people had nothing else to do. Like I feel like that was part of why people turned to that. And I think that this is something that, like you pointed out, most people don't watch something twice. We've now watched it twice. We haven't watched the last episode, but we've now watched all but the last episode twice. I would be so happy to watch this a third time.
Same.
And even if I didn't pick up anything new, just so many things were so well done, I would just be happy to revisit what I've already seen. And if I get anything new out of it, that's brownie points at that point. And
Agreed.
there are very few things that are like that where I can feel like, especially since we've watched this twice. I'm sure we will pick up something new because it does have interesting details. But most things I think that they have limited rewatchability. And part of that is there's nothing new in it. And even the things that have something new in it, it's like, how well done is it? And I feel like this hits all of those beats of it. It has new things that can make it rewatchable a second time, but also is high enough quality that you could rewatch it a third time, having picked up most of it, and still enjoy an additional rewatch. It's just well done.
It is very well done. I think this is a good time to talk about Sarah and the Symphony.
Yeah.
I'm glad Sarah's not dead. Glad she just had a heart attack, even though she is basically giving up.
And it's seeing the way that she talked to Kirsten in this scene was so sad. Some of the things that she said, it kind of reminded me a little bit of Frank, where I think that Frank knew his time was up, and not just because of his injury and because he was holding people back, but also because he had already lived his best life, and now things had changed that, and he couldn't do the things he was passionate about. And I think that Sarah has lost some of that with having lost Gil. Having lost Gil to a woman, was like a different woman, was more acceptable than knowing that he actually died.
Yeah.
Because at least she could be mad at him, but also possibly in the back of her mind, like happy for him.
Right.
Versus now it's like it's just sad that his life was cut short.
Yeah. And yeah, I feel really bad for her, and I don't think she's gonna die.
At least not yet.
Well, I don't think she's gonna die because I think they're gonna call in a doctor to help her.
That's exactly what I was thinking. That is it's the way that these stories are all being woven together is wild. And I really think that this next episode that we're about to get into is doing a lot of that last work of like weaving the threads together, where there are some big patches in this quilt or whatever. And I feel like that last episode is has filled a number of those.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
we saw the
and
connection
they've
that
set it up now.
Clark and Kiki had met when they were younger. We saw in episode 9 that Jeevan and Tyler met each other. It's some pretty wild stuff.
And it's interesting thinking of the traveling symphony as kind of the embracing of the new world. Seeing the way that they do things and like what they do and how they live as being the start of something new. And it's interesting because it doesn't completely throw away the past. I mean, but much of what they're doing is like built on Shakespeare's plays,
Right.
but it still feels like they are not worshiping the past like Clark does and like just curating it. Like they've built something new that is both, is both extremely relevant to this world, but also pulling on some of the things that were great from the past.
So, Jeevan. This was a crazy episode. We finally got to find out what happened to Jeevan, who some might argue best character, flawed character as well, who has
Yeah.
hallucinations, going crazy a little
Okay.
bit.
It's interesting because I feel like this storyline parallels some of what we've been talking about. I mentioned that Tyler was extremely important, but maybe he came a little too early, and that Clark was extremely important, but maybe he came a little too late. And I feel like this has some of those same kind of similarities, where I think that Jeevan and Kirsten were extremely important for each other. I honestly don't think that either of them would have survived without the other.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Jeevan has not been serious enough about things in his life to have really put in the effort needed to really be able to survive. But having this, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but having this burden on him forced him to like rise to the occasion.
Yeah.
And I think forced him to focus on her, which let him survive.
Yeah.
I think without Jeevan, I don't think there's a chance this little girl would have survived.
If he had just let her
But
go in that Uber in the first episode, she would be dead. 100% she would be dead. Jeevan lying to her, telling her to come to Frank's, he did save Kirsten. 100%.
but unfortunately, while they were so pivotal to each other early on, I think unfortunately this episode showed why they needed to go separate ways, and that same burden, which I think helped Jeevan rise to the occasion and survive that initial period, I think got too heavy for him and he needed somebody else to help him out with. And
Yeah, I mean, if you think about
and
it,
I
they were, they spent almost every day together for like a year, basically, right? And that is a lot of time to spend with just one person, especially when your age is not the same. You had no intention of raising a kid. Like, you need to be with other people. Like, and he says, I need to be around more adults. You need to be around more kids because, like, they were getting to a point where they were grating on each other. Like, they needed to
right.
go out and experience this world, and Kirsten was afraid, rightfully so she doesn't want to leave the cabin, and Jeevan is ready to leave the cabin.
I don't know if Kirsten's aspect was fear, because at that point she's throwing knives pretty well.
And shooting like deer, like she was the marksman of the group.
I I think honestly she was the more self-sufficient by that point. But unfortunately, I think that, with Jeevan having taken this weight on for so long, I think he unfortunately, having nobody else in his life, I think he was holding things against her,
Yeah.
and had a certain bitterness towards her, even though, once again, like, I think it's easy to see, like, pulling back, that he needed her to get that far. But being in the moment, I can see how he can, have bitterness towards that, and because of that, Kirsten needed to get out of that relationship and find people that would love her.
But then why do you think that Kirsten didn't want to leave the cabin then? Because he said we need to go, and she said I don't want to leave the cabin. To me, I do think she has some fear in her, even though that she's able to protect and defend herself. I think that was born out of the fear, but like the letting that one guy in, like, because Kirsten is very much like, remember when, at the beginning of the Traveling Symphony, when Dan first came in, she was ready to throw knives. She did it, she carries a knife on her at all times. Like, I think she does
Yeah,
carry a certain amount of fear, especially in this post-apocalyptic world. She just knows how to
yes.
she can take on 4 red bandanas, no problem, but she still has a bit of fear surrounding it.
But I possibly think his real emotion for wanting to leave was to find people.
Well, no, I
Because
know
I think
his
he
reason
needed
he wanted,
somebody
but why did
so
Kirsten not want to
desperately,
leave?
because she has a roof over her head, and she knows that she can continue to get food. And so it's like she has food, water, shelter. Why should she go anywhere else?
Right.
This is a perfect situation. He just, from her perspective, it might be that he's just leaving Jeevan. Like, he's just itching to go to the next thing. And so it's like, that to her, with her very limited life experience, that might seem dangerous. Of like, we have everything we need here. We can survive here. Why go somewhere where we don't know if we have all of that?
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair.
So, and I can see some fear in that. Like, maybe there's dangerous people somewhere. Like, why go somewhere that could have bad things if we are in a situation where we have good things? So
That's fair.
it it's interesting that, like, they so needed each other, and now they so badly need to move away from each other. Kirsten
And
needs people that will love her, so she can get some happiness in her life.
and I would
And
say they
yeah,
maybe, it's not that they don't need each other, because I could see a place where they could still need each other, but like I definitely think they needed other things than each other, right? Like, I think that Jeevan needed more than Kirsten, and I think Kirsten needed more than Jeevan. And I could have seen a world that they stayed together, and they went to the maternity ward together, or both joined the Traveling Symphony together, and maybe not Jeevan, but I could see a world where they still need each other, and I still think that they need each other. Like when Kirsten looks for Jeevan at the cabin, where Jeevan went back for Kirsten, even though he was
yes,
basically free and clear. Like I do think
yep,
they still in a way could need each other, but I do think that they were just grading on each other and they needed more outside of each other.
Well, I mean, at that point, I think they wanted each other. I think they needed other people.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do think that I do think there was love there. I just
Yeah.
think that that can be such a stressful situation that it can cause those kind of tense moments and that kind of tension to build.
Yeah, I mean,
And
they spent over a year, almost a year together, and we see a couple blowups, but clearly they had a system. They were working. Like I'm sure they had good times together, but we just saw the friction parts. Jeevan getting mad at her reading Station 11. We see.
You know what's funny about that?
What's that?
Was like going back to these characters being flawed characters. I get that Jeevan is pissed at that situation because he was worried he was going to lose his life. Like I don't think he realized that she wasn't going to kill him, He's worried he's going to lose his life, and so he's pissed that she's not focused.
Yeah.
But what was he just doing? He was super not focused and he was fucking around. He literally came out with like a clown, hair thing,
Right.
like clown wig on.
Smoking
Like he's
a joint.
literally
Smoking a joint,
playing on a keyboard. Like he is literally fucking around because they've seen in like over 100 days.
7 people.
They've seen 7 people.
9 people. 9 people.
Whatever it is, like so few people, that and then she doesn't do her thing, and he is pissed. Well, and I get it. I think anybody else in that situation wouldn't think about what they had just been doing as fucking around.
Right.
Like they felt like they were about to lose their life. Of course they're going to blame the other person. But it was just interesting seeing that happen.
Well, it's Jeevan has, leaving Jeevan has a hard time taking accountability.
Yes.
If you think about, like, he blew up at Kirsten, she's like, you're the one that wanted to leave Frank's. And he's like, yeah, and we left too late. You wanted to do your stupid play. But the guy was let in because Jeevan opened the door.
Jeevan.
So, like, Jeevan likes to blame Kirsten because, yeah, she's younger, and he doesn't really accept responsibility for things. So,
yeah.
Like, he blames, and we see why Kirsten held that guilt of why she maybe got Frank killed because they stayed a day later to do the play, but Jeevan's the one that opened the door, and did he not lock it again?
And didn't reset up the barricade.
Yeah.
Because they had, like, carts and they had, like, all the duct tape. Yep.
Or even just deadbolting the door. That guy just walked in. He just opened the door. He didn't kick it in. He didn't, like, sneak in. He just opened the door. Like, just deadbolt the door.
Right.
But seeing Jeevan hug that girl, I forget her name, the pregnant lady, the one he ends up...
I don't, yes.
But, like,
I don't remember her name either.
Seeing that moment where he is so vulnerable with her of, like, what he needs, and his, like, first hug with a grown-up in, I'm sure him and Frank didn't hug each other, all that often, if at all. And, Kirsten hugged him once in the beginning, but, like, he probably hadn't had, like, a physical connection with anybody in such a long time.
His hugs, like, especially with Kirsten, had been as a protector role.
Yeah.
And when he was approaching, I think that she was first, like the person at the Bed Bath and Beyond type place was first seeing that as, like a lonely man possibly wanting something sexual, like even if it's not necessarily sex, like in that direction. And it was so much more as comfort and possibly even childlike of really wanting somebody else to embrace him and hold him.
Yeah. I mean, his siblings took care
So
of him
emotional.
all the time. And he had to be this caregiver for Kirsten, and he needed somebody to soothe him and take care of his needs. And he finally got it. So like, even though they got separated and it was bad for them, I think this is ultimately what Jeevan needed. Like, I think that after this, he probably had less crazy moments where he wasn't talking to himself as much anymore. And I think that
Yeah.
ultimately it might have been hard for both of them, but it's both what they needed. There was a scene that I really liked, which was the birthing scene.
Yeah.
So we have heard throughout the show a couple moments of a cappella where, we hear other songs. We hear like the guitar, we heard a pipe organ at one point in this last episode, and we hear like these
Yeah. Yeah.
a cappella ones, which I think is so fitting for a show about this like very human experience that every human is going through by using a human instrument that's just singing. And what was really cool about the birthing scene, it wasn't straight a cappella. Like, there was a little bit, like, I think maybe a fiddle / violin and a drum, but there was a lot of singing that was that a cappella nature where like the voices were the instruments. And I don't know if you noticed that, like, in the beginning there was like one voice, and then like multiple voices came in singing that a cappella notes.
Yeah.
And so as these voices were coming into this new world, they were singing this a cappella, and like more voices kept coming in, and like it was so good, and like such a raw, powerful moment for Jeevan to go through. And it was just something that
It had a bluegrassy feel, kind of like it was like grassroots and natural, not like there was like some super well paid orchestra, because those are all dead at this point.
yeah,
Like anything that's left at this point has been cobbled together.
right,
And that's and very kind of like natural of a group, and that's what this kind of felt like. They've done a great job of kind of doing that, of being able to have swells of orchestral moments when it is appropriate, and having these kind of like more natural moments, and like being able to, I don't know who did the music in this, but like being able to pull in natural elements like the guitar when somebody has it, or like adding voices as literally like new voices are being added to the world, really feels so organic and so truly indicative of the moment, and not just mashing modern music, but at the same time knowing when to throw in that like modern music and have it hit.
oh yeah,
I love how this show ended. Like, great song at the end. They've had great needle drops
oh
when
yeah,
they want to do it, and they've had great like composed music. Like we mentioned before, when they added the lighter to the song,
right,
it got like that, like got my blood like boiling. Like
yeah,
it was so uncomfortable, like the tension that was creating. Amazing sound design and like musician composition.
yeah. I do have a bit of a crazy pipeline theory.
Okay.
This is gonna come as a shock. Are you ready? Get your tinfoil hat on. Tyler is the father of Alex.
I saw the paper. It said Alexandra.
You
Yes.
know what's so crazy? The first time I watched it, I missed the paper. I didn't see the paper.
Ditto.
And I told Julia, I was like, I bet that's Alex right there. 100% bet that's Alex.
I thought that was Cody,
Cody. Which one's Cody?
because Cody was the one that was killed by the Red Bandits. Cody was the one that showed up with Tyler when she first met
gotcha.
Tyler,
Gotcha. No,
right?
I thought it was
And
Alex.
and he said that Rose was Cody's mom, and we thought it was all made up, because it's like literally from Shakespeare, a rose by any other name. Of course he would use a name from Shakespeare, and it's a lie. The crazy thing is, like, it feels more like he kind of like storytelling, like he pulled inspiration.
Yeah.
So like it wasn't all a lie as much as it was inspired by reality.
Right. So the reason I think that
I
Tyler
agree. Yeah.
is actually Alex's father.
Oh, I don't know if I know that, but I definitely think that's Alex.
Jeevan says she's not the father, or he says so he's not the father,
Okay, okay,
but I still think he is. And I just did a little
okay.
bit of math because on that paper, she was born a year and 10 days, right?
Yeah.
The 40 weeks is how long humans gestate for, and that
Mm-hmm.
is 280 days. We then know that he was kicked out the first 100 days, right? He was kicked out of the
Yeah.
airplane. He meets Rose, and then 280 days later, from the first 100 days, so about 380 days, so about a year and 10 days, Alex is born. And he was very much wanting to take the baby. And I think that, yes, he is a little young, and she seemed a little bit older, and that could have been, Jeevan even said, like, okay, I guess he's not the father. But the math would check out that if he left the Museum of Civilization 100 days after, met Rose, he's Alex's father. That's my theory.
Ooh.
I don't know if we'll ever even get an answer to that,
Right.
but that's my theory.
Man, it's sad what he went through, and it's amazing how happy Alex was. So do you think he has followed her? Like followed her, not like followed, like kept up on her.
Well, he did seem to have an interest in Alex.
He did.
He knows the paper was already written that it was Alex, so he probably has a very good idea that that is Alex. And the maternity ward said we'll find her a good home. And so
Yeah.
Traveling Symphony, he has talked about seeing a lot of their performances, and that could be something that is true.
Which could explain how he knows. So because Clark checked him by saying a line from Shakespeare and seeing if he could say the other line, and he did.
Yeah.
And so that was like the first check before they did the live performance. And that could very much make sense to that, where he's been following that story.
Yeah. So will we get any payoff to find out if that's true? I don't know.
I think the other big connection is that Terry, she took that name, but that wasn't her given name. Her given name was Deborah. And I think that is what Saint Deborah by the Water was named from.
So she's Saint Deborah.
Because that was where Saint Deborah by the Water was.
And so
It literally they made a reference to the fact that it was by the water.
I completely missed that, but you're right. That is probably Saint Deborah for birthing all those babies.
Saint Deborah by the Water.
She is Saint Deborah.
So it's like so many threads have finally been kind of like pulled together.
Wow, I completely missed that one. And Jeevan, who was the first initial responder to Arthur Leander having the heart attack on stage, he then goes his whole life and becomes a doctor. And one thing Julia told me from the book that was different
Okay. Yeah.
is Jeevan was in school for paramedics. He was training to be a paramedic, and that's why he initially ran on stage to save Arthur Leander in the book.
Okay.
She didn't tell me too much more after that, or didn't confirm that he became a doctor in this one. She just said that he was in paramedic school originally. But how full circle, he was the first one to respond. Jeevan is a natural person that wants to help people. He helped Kirsten. He has these tendencies, and then he becomes a doctor. He was Dr. 11 in the play. He becomes a doctor. Just so many tiny little threads that are all woven into a tapestry.
Absolutely. And I think, a while back I talked about when we first had the episode on this Severn City Airport, and I mentioned that in this day and age, it doesn't matter who you were. So the one guy who was the janitor managed to play the part of the FBI or whoever and take a group and move somewhere else. And Clark, who was, I don't want to say like failed actor, but he didn't succeed in that and moved to like CEO Whisperer. And then because right place, right time, right skill set, like rises to become the leader of this group. I think we see that same kind of thing with this group where we have Terry slash Deborah lost her job because of a Ponzi scheme. Like she should not be doing the kind of stuff she's in our world. We would say it is inappropriate for you to be doing what you're doing. Because of what she did, she had the happy accident of not being in it when everybody else died because they were in it, but she had the experience, and she was able to, I think, kind of make up for her sins, and help all of these other people out. And similar to that, I think that, this is very much what Jeevan needed. Jeevan needed like the right mix of having something on his shoulders to help him rise up, but also having a support structure so he didn't feel like he was bearing all of that weight on his own.
Yeah.
So it's like I think having that weight on his shoulders was what helped him rise to the occasion. And then I think he was starting to collapse from it. And I think that having Terry as the head person that he could kind of like listen to was an ease off of that, where he could go where he was most needed, but if anything got over his head, this other person Terry could kind of jump in. And so it was interesting how it didn't matter who you were before,
Right.
and how perfect this situation was. Like once again, like it really feels like everything is so woven together. It's so interesting how it's all kind of coming together, and I'm really interested to see how those last threads.
Yeah, how they tie up the story, how, how is it going to end? We have all these conflicting ideals. I'm sure we're going to see Kirsten and Jeevan meet up.
Not just how it ends, but like also the interesting thing about a show like this is it's not just like we've seen everything we've seen here and now we just need to see this last part. It's a tapestry and there are like holes in it, so it's like yes, we want to see the end, but also there are some gaps that they're going to close up, and
I know.
I love that.
I'm super excited.
Like I saw at the end of the episode, they show you like what's going to happen in the next episode, and I saw Miranda. So it's like we're going to get a little bit more of her.
Wow.
So it really feels like, and once again, this doesn't just feel like a cheap trick, where they're just withholding information. There's something about the way the story is told where it feels like it can't be told any other way. And I really do enjoy that about it.
Same. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it is extremely well done. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of loose threads, but I feel like there is still some loose threads, and I think with the final episode we're gonna get a nice conclusion, and I'm really excited to see it.
Not necessarily a lot of loose threads, but I did actually feel like Miranda's was one of the last ones that I didn't. The fact that she saw Dr. 11 at the end, I still kind of wondered like how I get how her work has permeated into other people's lives so far on, but it did still feel like there was just something kind of missing from her. And it feels like there's a few of those other gaps where I may not even necessarily be able to put my finger on what I'm missing, as much as it is like in the back of my mind, I know that there's something still missing from this story.
Right.
And I love this storytelling.
I do too.
So hopefully they nail the ending.
Yeah, hopefully they do. But with that, I think our journey has come to an end. We will find out next week on the finale of Station 11 what is going to happen. So come back, join us as we break down the finale next week. I'm Mark. This is Sterling.
Thanks.